I can put laptop on the floor. I can.
Yes, I don't want people to trip over it. They think so. I sent the link to my colleague who wants to take a look and see if it's working. But I mean, it seems like it's all in 2 minutes.
Okay. Oh, I see. There's some things. The back of that guy's thing. Perfect. Okay. And what about audio?
So this is on YouTube.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear any audio? It's good. Okay. Great. Oh, is that the microphone? Should we maybe put that microphone up there? Up there? Why not just move this whole thing right there so then your microphone feed will be closer?
Can we do it on the table?
But
What's wrong?
Because, the camera?
yeah, it's not.
Oh,
not
it's that.
wide.
That's the.
Yeah.
Oh.
For
Yeah.
Okay, here, let me see. What's our length? Here. Okay.
If I put it here.
Okay, let's see.
Here.
Oh,
Yeah, I can put it here. We need all 6 chairs, right? Or 7.
Oh.
Right?
Issues sort of haven't really seen it for a while.
Yeah, well, it's one that
yes, we are.
So they can see each other
Oh, I see.
after the speeches and
Okay.
Q&A.
Okay.
So they yes, they will.
Okay. Let's see how long the microphone goes to.
I have extension. I'll put the extension. No.
Oh, that's not.
Yeah, because that would definitely be
After the speaker's speech. Oh gosh, sorry. After the speakers do the speech, then they're going to pull that podium away, and the people are all going to be there. And so
Okay,
then
I'll
that
just
way
put
we'll
it on the
just
table.
move it on the table. Okay, and then it's a little bit fuzzy.
Yeah.
Is that because? Why is that?
I couldn't bring wireless camera with HD camera
Uh-huh.
because we would need
Okay.
Wi-Fi, and I was told
Right,
no
right.
Wi-Fi.
Right. Okay, so it works. Okay.
How it looks on the we can play that. It was better.
Oh yeah.
Much better.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Okay. All right.
It was this, maybe
Right.
20, 30 seconds.
Right. It makes it mess up. Okay.
We're gonna get started here. A few more people will probably wander in, but it's a little after 12, so I just wanted to welcome everybody. My name is Dennis Phelan. I'm with the Pacific Seafood Processors Association. We're a Seattle-based trade group of companies that operate in the North Pacific, West Coast area, Alaska, producing a whole variety of types of seafood. And I just got a couple of roles here today. One is to do the obligatory thank yous. And I want to thank first off the folks at Senator Mikowski's office who helped with the logistics and getting everything together. And particularly as we've been working with technology this morning, I heard thank Ben Potter, who's been working very hard on that. Lord knows I couldn't do it. Also, I want to thank the folks at Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute for arranging for the seafood. We've got some crab and fresh salmon from Alaska. The salmon, which is Copper River sockeye, was caught on Tuesday, so you're not going to get a lot of pressure on the East Coast. Also, thank Guy Simmons with Sea-Watch over in Maryland for providing the powder. And also John Conley and all of his folks at the National Fisheries Institute again for physical help, and also John's willingness, to act as moderator today. Just a very short background on how this is all going to work. First off, at lunch, Senator Mikowski will be showing up. Most of all, 30 tips and remarks. Then we will start through our speakers. Presentations will be pretty brief because we want to save a bit of time for Q&A at the end. So on your tables, you'll also see some index cards and pens. As the speakers are going through their presentations, anything that pops into your mind, feel free to write down any questions you have. We will collect those and work that as part of the Q&A near the end of the program. With that, why don't you just all go ahead, we will start the lunch, and then hopefully Senator Mikowski will be here on the line. Thanks again for coming.
Sure did. Sure did. I just wanted to say oh, you did? St. Louis, Delaware? How about that?
Test, 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 test.
folks, if I could have your attention for a sec. Senator Murkowski's joined us, so if we could suspend the service or the clinking for a couple of minutes. I'll do a quick introduction and we'll get the senator up here. As many of you probably know, I would hope you would know, the Constitution of the state of Alaska requires that fisheries be managed on a sustainable basis. It's also a fact that the commercial fishing industry in Alaska is the largest private sector employer in the state, which means we like to think that we're sort of important folks up there. And Senator Murkowski has been very active during her 12 years in the Senate in supporting the industry, helping us on the various challenges that we face. Obviously, we have reauthorization of Magnuson-Stevens going on right now, but there are a lot of other issues that kind of come up on I'm sure it seems daily or hourly basis that we're in talking about things like access to foreign markets, seafood labeling legislation, federal health inspections, stock assessments, and of course, why we're here today, seafood sustainability. On this final issue, the Senator has been a leader in ensuring that federal agencies seek the advice of their sister agency at NOAA Fisheries when they are trying to decide what is sustainable and what are good seafood choices. And the Senator, as I said, has been very active in steering them towards that relationship of keeping government purchases and government decisions within the federal government. So now that I've said all these nice things, my only conclusion is that after having done this job for a long time, I know the issues are important, but really all I want to do is work with nice people, and there are fewer people as nice as Senator Murkowski. So please welcome Senator Lisa Murkowski.
Of course, I like the last part of that introduction best. Dennis, it is great to work with you. I really, really do appreciate it. You know, you mentioned how often the issue of our fisheries, seafood, what we are doing to ensure that our oceans are protected so that we do have good, sustainable fisheries, not only for the jobs, but for the fabulous food that we're able to eat. It does seem like it is almost all-consuming. I'm actually a few minutes late to join you here this afternoon because as I was walking out from the vote that we just held, Senator Whitehouse from Rhode Island, who is my counterpart, my co-chair on the Senate Oceans Caucus, he and I were chatting about the Oceans Policy Conference that we're going to be participating in next week, led by Secretary Kerry, and all of the fun and cool things that we get to do as part of the Oceans Conference. So it is somewhat all-consuming. When I go back home, I can tell you that there is not a trip back to the state of Alaska where I am not immersed or involved in one way, shape, or form in issues as they relate to the fisheries. When I was back over this past recess, spent about 2 days out in the Bristol Bay region there, not only talking about things like transportation, but the impact of a potential pebble mine on our fisheries, knowing and understanding how we work to ensure that our fisheries are always strong and again sustainable. Last weekend I did kind of a quick weekend turnaround up in the state, flew from Washington D.C. to Cordova, Alaska, and no, there is no direct flight, but once you get there you feel like you're in the best part of if not America, perhaps the world itself. A beautiful fishing coastal community that had come together to celebrate fish. Just celebrate fish. And that's a pretty great thing. I woke up this morning thinking about my sons who are en route now, going up to Bristol Bay to work for the balance of the season there. They're on a tender. They've been putting themselves through college. The oldest one graduated, then had the nerve and the temerity to do crazy things like Captain Keith Colburn here and go out on a crabber in the Bering Sea. So I have been part of the fisheries from a very personal basis as well. not only do I want to make sure that our fisheries are sustainable, I want to make sure that within the industry itself, that it is a safe industry. I have vested interest in many, many ways. Lots of very familiar faces around the room today, so I'd like to thank those of you who have traveled to be part of the Sustainable Fisheries Lunch. And for those of you who also earn your living out on our waters, thank you for what you do, your personal efforts, your personal commitment to make sure that not only are the jobs there, that the industry is strong, but that our fisheries are sustainably managed. Good to see Eileen Sobek here, who's head of National Marine Fisheries Service, here to talk about her agency's very important role in sustainably managing our nation's federal fisheries. I'd also like to recognize Dennis Phelan and John Connolly for organizing the event, to ASME, to the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute, for providing what I'm sure is good seafood here today. You get to enjoy it. I have to do other work. But I know that when we offer up lunches like this, you sometimes come for the speakers, but you always come for the good seafood that is provided. Dennis mentioned a little bit about the significance of the fisheries to Alaska, to our fishermen, to our seafood producers, to our coastal communities around the state. Our seafood industry supports more than 63,000 direct jobs, contributes over $4.6 billion to our state's economy. Back in, I was going to say last year, but it was in the 2013 season, the commercial fishermen around the state harvested more than 265 million salmon. And you say, man, that's a lot of salmon. But man, we got a lot of salmon. With nearly 1 in 7 Alaskans that are employed in the commercial seafood industry, and numbers like these that I've just shared, you can understand why we in Alaska take very, very seriously how the federal government's actions impact our state's fishermen. And it's one of the reasons that I've been working so hard to really push back against the FDA's approval of genetically engineered salmon. I don't know, maybe you would come to a lunch where you didn't know where your seafood was created. I don't know that I would. We have been taking this issue on head on, and not just myself, Senator Begich, Congressman Young. The FDA is on a track here, and I don't think that it is a good track when it comes to genetically engineered salmon. But we've said, hey, if you do take that wrong-headed approach and approve this, I think at a bare minimum, the people of this country deserve to know that that's what it is that they are eating, that it is not a wild Alaska sustainably managed fishery coming from the salmon fishery, but that it is in fact genetically engineered. And so we inserted language in the Senate Appropriations Bill that moved through just last week to ensure, 2 weeks ago I guess it was, to ensure that that labeling be in place. My preference is that the FDA not allow it in the first place. But if they do, at a bare minimum, this so-called frankenfish needs to be labeled as such. Now, last year there were several issues that presented themselves relating to sustainability. Dennis hinted to those, but let me speak to just a couple of them here. First is the National Park Service's food service guidelines that supported the use of third-party NGO-driven seafood certification initiatives. And then the second issue was the Walmart decision to assess whether to continue carrying wild Alaska salmon. And I think most of you in the room know that there were some pretty interesting exchanges with the director of the Park Service. After those exchanges, the agency changed its guidelines. They dropped the reference to the third-party NGO certification, and then with some additional encouragement, so did the GSA and the Health and Human Services Department. with regards to the direction that Walmart were taking. My exchanges with Walmart's CEO simply had asked for a fair evaluation of the fisheries management system. And Walmart, to their credit, did a thorough review of our Alaska salmon fisheries. They concluded, appropriately so, that they are sustainably managed and would then still carry them in their stores. I do have to give great credit on this issue, though, to Stephanie Moreland, who is in the room. Stephanie's with the governor's office. She did a great job, along with ASME, in educating Walmart's team. And I think, in the end, we would agree that the decision that vendor made was an easy one. But when you think about it, both of these outcomes really are good news for Alaska's seafood industry. But that doesn't mean that the work is over. I think we still face some continued mischaracterization about our fisheries, and not only just in Alaska, but around the country, and certainly led to my ongoing efforts to ensure that sustainably managed U.S. fisheries are acknowledged in the public light that I think that they deserve. So I've introduced what we're calling the Responsible Seafood Certification and Labeling Act. It would prohibit any federal agency from using, endorsing, or promoting third-party NGO-driven certification, seafood certification schemes. It's pretty simple. I think it's very important, and we're going to work to push this legislation going forward. This year, I've worked through the appropriations process to include the language in the CJS bill to prohibit federal agencies using these third-party certifications. The language also acknowledges in that CGS bill the role of NOAA's Fish Watch program to inform our consumers about our nation's sustainable fisheries, which we really appreciate. We've also been working to ensure that we've got good, strong funding for NOAA's stock assessments for the fisheries management activities, as well as the survey work, and as well as funding for the councils and commissions. So this is all part of the effort to ensure that we have continued sustainable management of our fisheries in Alaska and really throughout the country. So we've got a great story to tell. We can talk about it all we want, but as they say, the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the tasting here. And when you know you have the best, when you know that you're eating what God and Mother Nature are putting on your table, unadulterated, except maybe with a little sauce and spice, maybe a little wine, you know it's the best. So thank you for what you do working with us to help make a difference in ensuring the sustainability of our fisheries here in this country. So thanks for your efforts. Dennis, I'm assuming they can all go back to eat now, right? But their soup is cold. We need warm soup. Thank you. All right, go back to work. So, I don't remember what the event was, but everyone wearing the Santa, silver Santa. And I don't
Carl, which of these? Excuse me. We're just going to get started. Yeah, thank you. We'll get started with the rest of the program. Realize we're running a little behind given the senator's schedule. As the speakers are coming up to the front table, we invite the staff to continue to serve the salmon that's coming forward. But during that time, we'll ask Laura Bryan to just present a little background about NOAA Fisheries and the Fish Watch program as a means to set the stage for some of the discussion.
Okay, so I'm not the IT specialist, which stands for intermittent technology, I would argue. So we're going to have to just kind of journey this, and it's got an audio. Does it work?
Yes.
Never works.
Let's
Do I
hear
get
it
play
ready.
to use this stuff? No? Awesome. Okay. Do I just press it?
You know. So, that's a great introduction, and I really appreciate everyone attentively listening to that. A great introduction to how NOAA not only does a good job, but has begun to communicate the good job that they do. So if I could ask Eileen Sobek and Guy and Keith to come on up, begin the presentation. Stephanie, I was going to give you a last bit to eat, but you come on up too. just as folks are coming up, my name is John Connolly. I'm the president of the National Fisheries Institute, which represents the seafood industry in the U.S., water to table, and so harvesters in Alaska through companies like Publix here. And we have 5 speakers today, starting at the national level. Eileen Sobek is the assistant administrator at NOAA Fisheries. She spent 25 years working at the Department of Justice in the Environment and Natural Resources Division. And I asked her one particular thing, and I'm sure Eileen always gets this, but how many people in the room have a sea slug named after them? Small species. So there obviously is a story behind that. At one point we will hit that. Stephanie Moreland, moving on to the state regional level, is the Governor Parnell's fisheries advisor in Alaska. Extensive experience in Alaska's diverse and expansive fisheries. She was previously Senator Murkowski's fishery advisor here in D.C. She also works on the global area on the Arctic questions. Moving down to actual practitioners then, we'll have Guy Simmons, who's a harvester and processor on my far left, the harvester and processor of clams in the East Coast, operating in Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. He is active in a number of organizations, both within the broader government area, like the Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Management Council, but he's also the head of the Clam Committee, which is a pre-competitive group that looks at how to manage clams better, using science as the basis of that. And we're very pleased that his group has been asked by the National Science Foundation to actually partner with them on some sustainability issues associated with science. Last 2 speakers on my right, Guy Pizzuti is the seafood buyer at Publix, which is the major seafood market down in the southeast. Guy has a very interesting background, and there's not going to be a seafood buyer in the country that has more experience than this man. Spent a year as an observer up in Alaska, and then 8 years in the science center for NOAA in the southeast, actually doing field work on the vessels, and then subsequently spent 17 years as a buyer at Publix. So this is not a person that's floated in and out of the seafood business as a buyer and then moving on to electronics or something else. He knows this issue, he knows it well, so I think his voice is particularly important to listen to. And then finally we have Keith Colburn, who's the captain of the Wizard, crab fishing boat out of Alaska. I don't think he needs a whole lot of introduction, but if you do, look at his hat. He's the captain of the Wizard again, from the Discovery Channel's Deadliest Catch. What makes Keith interesting, though, is when we talked last week, the amount of time that Keith, as a vessel captain, has spent in dealing with NOAA's Fishery Management Council process. This isn't a person that just goes out onto the water and catches fish. He's deeply involved in it, having engaged in the Fishery Council process to understand and improve that system. So I think it's a real demonstration of how this system works. So with that as an introduction from national to regional to practitioners, Eileen, we're going to start with you with an overview. Eileen's going to do about a few minutes, and then each person's going to do less than 5 minutes, and then we'll get into some questions and answers.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that introduction, John, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today, to the sponsors and to the entire audience. I'm going to spend a little bit of time filling in a little bit of detail on some of the themes that Senator Murkowski introduced, and I understand that we have folks in the audience from sort of a whole range of knowledge levels, and so I want to, even for the people on the front table and our sponsors who work on these issues every day and have been involved in for decades, sometimes I think it's good to step back and remember kind of where we started from on some of these issues, and then sort of end up where we are now, and so frame up the journey that has ended up here with a lot of the elements that people are going to talk to in the front table, and that will frame the discussion that's going on here in Capitol Hill in the next few months and a year about Magnuson Act reauthorization. So I think the message I want to start with is that U.S. fisheries, we've got a lot to be proud of. The collective we. This has been a journey, a 4-decade journey of investment, sacrifice, and success. And we really need to keep that in mind. That we've gone from, and I'll get into this in a little bit more detail, a period of grave concern about fisheries and the way they were managed, and whether there was going to be a future both for on the ecological survival side and on the industry survival side. And now we are at a place where we, as Senator Murkowski said, should be really proud of our industry. We should help promote our industry. We should get people feeling good about eating U.S. seafood. We're all benefiting from all of that. So I want to just run through fairly quickly a summary of the history of our fisheries, our modern fisheries management, kind of the cornerstones, the foundations of our success, and the current status of fisheries at the moment, so we know where we're starting, where our journey was, how we've gotten there, and what we're going to do in the future. So the theme is sustainability, and I want to, before I go into the history, I want to just remind folks of a few things about sustainability. We think about it, we have been thinking about it as a goal, and it is, and we've made a lot of progress to the goal, but there is no end point. It is a continuing journey. We must maintain it. We don't get to just say we've reached a level of sustainability and we can wash our hands of it and we don't need any more money for science and we don't need any more money for management, and we're back to everybody's on their own. We've developed a robust process, and we want to maintain it. It's got to be transparent and participatory. We've got to have our partners, our stakeholders. We've got to have states, the fishery management councils, industry, from soup to nuts or from the ocean to the dinner table involved. It's got to be science-based. We've got to have monitoring. We've got to have science that's out there to be reviewed by both the public and the professional community. We've got to be responsive to changing conditions and emerging concerns. We've got to, there are a lot of new issues out there: climate change, ocean acidification, learning, as we learn more about the interconnectedness of various elements of the ecosystem, we have to bring that into our fisheries science assessment. And we have to remember that part of how we got here was through having enforceability of our important management provisions. It's part of the legitimacy of our system is making sure that everybody is accountable under the law. So sustainability is dynamic. With science and management, it's ever evolving, as I said. And again, after 40 years of progress and $100 million or more invested by U.S. taxpayers and our fishing industry, we've made a lot of progress. We can really be proud and should be bragging on that progress. All right. Here we are, managing U.S. fisheries, pivotal history points. To understand where we are today, you really have to understand where we started and how we got there. And I'm just going to give you a couple of milestones. Before 1976, international waters began 12 miles offshore, and beyond that 12-mile limit, there was a lot of fishing by foreign fleets. We talked a lot about underutilized fishing and how we could make some money off of foreign fleets and working on joint ventures, and that ended up not being all that we might have thought it was going to be at the time. So in 1976, the first iteration of our modern fisheries management law was enacted, and it had two key principles at the time: to Americanize the U.S. fleet and to establish a 200-mile Fishery Conservation Zone, FCZ, which evolved into the U.S. EEZ. It's easy to remember. It's easy to forget that the concept of a 200-mile zone, an EEZ, over which the United States has full control of all of our natural resources. To think that that's fundamental, it's been around for a long time, but that is not the case. That is a relatively, when it was established under the original Magnuson Act, it really only extended to fishery resources, and it wasn't until a 1983 executive order that the full-blown EEZ was established under U.S. law. The second really modern, crazy, out there idea in the original Magnuson Act was that there were 8 fishery regional fishery management councils, really embodying in the statute itself this notion that regional partnership stakeholder involvement was absolutely fundamental to having a responsible management scheme. I think we take for granted now that if you really want to have buy-in and legitimacy and full implementation of federal conservation laws, you really have to work with partners. You have to be collaborative. You have to involve stakeholders from, individual consumers, landowners, whatever you're talking about. But that was really a concept that was pioneered in the Magnuson Act. So that was 1976. That really was set the framework, the skeleton for modern fisheries management. In 1996, there was another very substantial amendment where we could say the Act gained a little bit, put a little muscle on that skeleton. It introduced fish habitat as a key component, and realized and sort of recognized the fact, again, a bit somewhat prescient compared to other statutes, that it's not just about fishing and effort and fishermen. It's all about the overall ecosystem, and you have to look at fisheries habitat when you're looking at the health of fisheries overall. And there was performance standards for developing fishery management plans that embraced biological, ecological, and economic components were introduced in the statute. So, and then importantly, Senator Stevens' name was added to the Act, so it became the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act. It will forever be identified with those two senators as being incredibly important moving partners in fisheries management. 2007, frankly, in my estimation, this might be almost the most important milestone for fisheries management. It was really a game changer. It gave teeth to the Act, and I think that as much had been done as could have been done with the, I don't want to call them voluntary, but with the Act as it was, and we were still at a point in time where we had many fisheries that were being conducted at unsustainable levels. So this was a game changer. The Act really got teeth with the addition of annual catch limits to prevent overfishing and to ensure rebuilding, and by making sure that there were accountability measures to ensure that the ACLs were enforced, and that to the extent that there was overfishing on a one-time annual basis, that there was a corrective, reactive response to that. So by the end of 2012, as a result of all of these the cumulative evolution of the Magnuson Act, by the end of 2012, all U.S. fisheries had ACLs in place. That covers 446 stocks and complexes under 46 fishery management plans. And we had made incredible progress, which I will give you a few stats on in a minute. But that was the statutory framework that had evolved over time. And I wanted to just leave you with sort of our three pillars of implementation, our sort of three fundamental principles that we in the Fisheries Service have tried to employ in implementation of this Act, and I think that has contributed to its success. First, science, 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 science. NOAA is a service-based agency, but it's one that's based on sound science, and this is how we defend the sustainability of our fisheries, both to be able to make the case for why fisheries are sustainable, and to make the case and support the fishing effort that we think is legitimate. So we are a science. Our science is world-class. We want to keep it that way. It's constant, as I said, it's constantly evolving. We are continuing to employ new technology, new integrated modeling methods. Whatever is out there, we're going to be doing our best to use it. We are committed to science as the foundation of our management. But management is integral to this whole process. Obviously, it's the that's what it's all about. It's kind of the nervous system. It takes the input from the science side. We try to make sure that that we share our science and our information and our management options. We want to make them public and transparent. We want to get as much involvement as we can. We're trying to improve continuously. We're open to management measures, whether it's new technologies, new approaches, modification of existing approaches. We are trying to be flexible to respond to new technologies or scientific methods, or just modify based on, on the water knowledge that's being brought to our attention on a consistent basis. Again, I have to mention, I guess as a former lawyer and former supervisor of prosecutors, that enforcement is an important tool. Compliance and accountability is important. It's important both to maintain the resource, and it's important to make sure that we have a level playing field, and that people who follow the rules receive the benefits of doing so, and that cheaters don't get an unfair advantage. So we've talked about what our statutory and regulatory kind of framework is. We've talked about the principles of implementation, and now I just have a couple of slides to set the stage for sort of what the current status of U.S. fisheries is. So managing U.S. fisheries nationally is actually a bit of a challenge. We have the largest EEZ in the world, over 11.4 million square kilometers. I don't know if we, is that an American kind of thing to talk about square kilometers? But as you can see, we've got a lot of coast in a lot of different places. We manage every kind of fishery and ecosystem, up in the Arctic, down in the Caribbean, industrial, commercial fishing, to artisanal and subsistence fishing, coastal to international to pelagic. We've got a lot on our plate. We've got a national program, but clearly we have to be able to tailor our implementation to a very local level. This is very hard to read, but really what you need to take away from this slide is we have a hell of a lot to be proud of here in the United States. This is a graph that represents where, by country, each bar is a country, compliance with the voluntary FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fishing. And all you need to know is the United States is #2, Norway is #1 in terms of conduct of responsible fisheries. This is one measure of where we are on the sustainability continuum. We manage the second most. We have the most sustainable fisheries in the world, second only to Norway. Norway's a lot smaller, a lot fewer people, a lot fewer different kinds of fisheries. So we have a lot to be proud of, and this is a story that we all need to tell. So we have. This is just so that you feel the obligatory statistics, so that everybody really gets a flavor of when we talk about we've really improved, we have sustainable fisheries. What does that mean? It means that 83% of all stocks now with a known status are not overfished. It means 91% of stocks with a known status are not subject to overfishing. I won't go through exactly what the FSSI is. It's kind of like the Dow Jones of where we are, but of our major stocks, 80% are not overfished. 87% are not subject to overfishing. We keep making positive progress. We're not content. This is a dynamic process. It's not like there's a fixed number of fisheries that we're trying to rebuild. As we get new information, all information is good information. We get new information. It might show us that stocks that we knew nothing about are actually substantially overfished. That's great. We put them on the list. We start working on them. Since 2000, 34 fish stocks have been declared rebuilt, and we're hoping we improve on that every year. Again, once a stock has been rebuilt and is not subject to overfishing, it really is sustainable, being conducted on a sustainable basis. And our job is not over there. It's our job to sort of maintain that sustainability, but it means we're sort of past the critical period where we have to make a lot of the huge sacrifices in order to get to that point. Obviously, with factors like climate change, we're not going to be done. It is affecting clearly sea level rise, sea temperature rise, the way it affects fisheries habitats, the way it affects distribution of fisheries, ocean acidification, a lot of challenges right now, a lot of question marks about how currently healthy fishery stocks might be affected into the future. So we still need to go back one slide. I want to go back to this one last map, if we can, Laurel, is that possible? I just wanted to show this one box, which you can't read, but this is each box relates to the regions that are outlined and has the list of the 34 stocks that have been rebuilt since 2000, sort of broken out by region, so you can see the work that we've done. And one thing I wanted to say is, again, sort of playing on some themes that were raised by Senator Murkowski. These are success stories. These are stocks that are now rebuilt. These are sustainable fisheries now, and we need to be proud of those. And we need to get the word out. And we need to urge people to feel good about buying these fish, eating these fish, serving these fish at their restaurants. And I know this is an Alaska and West Coast crowd, but I'll use a New England example. You know, if you were parachuting in from Mars, you know, and you were just listening to, you know, reading the press and in this area, you would think that every fishery in New England was as disastrous as New England groundfish, and that was the biggest fishery in the region, and that, you know, that fishing in New England was pretty much on the edge of extinction. And the reality is, if you look at the scallop fishery, it was one of the first fisheries that was recovered in 2001, and it now is one of the most profitable fisheries in the entire country. There's some great success stories, even in areas where there are continuing challenges. And I think that we, of course, we want to continue to address stocks that still haven't been brought back to a sustainable level. We're always going to focus on the problem children, but we have to make sure that our honor students are recognized as well. And that's a story that we all want to tell. So that's my last slide. I guess I just want to, again, remind you that this fishery management journey is ongoing. We're making strides to continue to end overfishing and rebuild stocks. I think the United States should be proud to be a global leader in sustainable fisheries and in supporting our fisheries. It is our rigorous management process that has gotten us there. We just need to remember, seafood harvested in the United States is sustainable. We don't want to undermine progress that has been made. We have some, you know, we can always do better. We can work on bycatch reduction. We can work on the fisheries that still remain to be that are still overfished. We can focus science on big problems that we know are coming down the road, like climate change. But we've got a really great statutory regulatory system, and I think that we should keep that in mind. The one last thought I wanted to leave you with is FishWatch, which is a NOAA product that Laurel Bryant was kind of the godmother of. If you want to know about it, it provides information about specific species and how they're managed. And if you want to know something about a particular kind of salmon or a particular kind of crab or a fishery in your district, you should just hop right on to fishwatch.gov, and you will have the latest and greatest information on those fisheries. So I look forward to hearing from everybody else who's actually a lot closer to the fish on the water or on the dock or in a restaurant. One last thing, just for folks on the Hill. NOAA Fisheries runs a congressional summer briefing series, and so we have a couple of sessions that are one in later this month, June 24th, on closing the data gap, challenges in stock assessment science, and one on July 8th on healthy habitat.
Great. Anyone that needs more information about that, the NOAA staff can provide that. The other speakers are going to be a little bit tighter. We wanted, to have some time to talk about the full program. We would like to talk a bit about Alaska. If you looked at that map, or that chart of the EEZ, we are huge, and Alaska is a huge part of a huge. So I'd like Stephanie to talk a little bit about Alaska fisheries management.
Thanks for the opportunity. And as we said, my name is Stephanie Moreland. I'm a policy advisor for fisheries and for ocean issues for Alaska Governor Sean Parnell. And I appreciate you taking the time today to be with us and hear a little bit more about our perspective on many of the fishery management issues. We have really healthy fishery resources, strong fisheries management programs, and fishermen and fishing communities that really rely on us to sustain them. And I want to talk a little bit about those and also touch on our continuing concerns in Alaska over seafood certification and really concern over it undermining our good governance that we have in place and public process that has been established by the state and by Congress. In the North Pacific, as you heard from the Senator and was reinforced by the last presentation, we really are fortunate to have a vast coastline, productive river systems, strong marine habitat and waters that support Alaska's persistent high ranking in the world for seafood production. We're more fortunate to be home to a population that really values sustainable fisheries. Our Constitution, as has been mentioned, is the only one in the nation that actually mandates renewable resources be utilized, developed, and maintained on a sustainable yield principle. And our fishermen and broad public hold us accountable to that mandate. Fishing fleets in Alaska not only tolerate but support sustainable management and science-based decision-making in Alaska, even when it means that in-season fisheries restrictions are necessary or setting conservative catch limits to buffer for uncertainty and stock assessment data are needed. Our fishermen actively engage in science to monitor and assess our fisheries resources. They contribute data through our industry-funded observer programs, and they work with stock assessment authors to share insights from fishing grounds that might lead to better understanding of how variations in the marine environment affect fisheries resources, which is how I've gotten to know Keith and many other fishermen in Alaska. We spend a lot of time all winter talking about fish. They continuously call for best available science and are responsive to the results. Alaska is home to fisheries managed by the state and federal governments, and many of our fisheries are managed jointly. In Alaska, our state and federal management programs put fish first in our management practices, and as a result of that, the comprehensive amendments that occurred in the most recent version of Magnuson-Stevens Fishery and Conservation and Management Act really were based on what we do in Alaska. All of the specifics regarding catch limits, the last set of amendment packages that were on the screen in the Assistant Administrator's presentation were things that we've been doing in Alaska for decades. I'm going to bypass a little bit more depth on our management system and be sure that I get into the certification issues and provide opportunity for some discussion. Both Alaska and the U.S. have been held up as models of responsible management and have some of the best managed fisheries in the world. The globally recognized success has been achieved through transparent, science-based, participatory fisheries governance structures, not in response to a private sustainability standard. This is ingrained in our program. Alaska operates in a global marketplace, exporting fish products to over 100 countries. Despite our decades-old track record, though, a recent movement has gained momentum that requires third-party certification of sustainability as a precursor or a qualification to access markets. We believe it's unnecessary for Alaska or for U.S. fisheries, but we recognize that the reality that certification has become important in some markets to provide outside independent verification of sustainability. Just over 10 years ago, Alaska salmon was the first major fishery certified by the private London-based Marine Stewardship Council, or MSC. Since then, we found the eco-label movement has become more about brand protection and restricting market access than it has been about sustainability. In 2011, Alaska's leading salmon producers, in response, decided to withdraw from the MSC program. They saw the Alaska brand being eroded and replaced by a generic eco-label. But more importantly to this discussion, the MSC model allows for conditional certification, providing equivalent market access and credentials for lower achieving fisheries than what we maintain in Alaska. Responsibly managed fisheries are disadvantaged by this approach, and consumers are unable to distinguish a truly responsible fishery from one that has been granted heavily conditioned certification. As a result, Alaska, in collaboration with other high-achieving fisheries, advanced an alternative certification model that was robust enough to satisfy any corporate social responsibility policy. The alternative that was developed is called the Responsible Fishery Management Certification Program. In Alaska, we believe no single eco-label should serve or strive to serve as the only litmus test for sustainability. It undermines the U.S. system of fisheries governance and Alaska's world-class management system. And look forward to more opportunity to discuss this.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie. Moving down to the East Coast analog for Alaska, Guy Simmons is involved in the plant fishery on the East Coast, which actually has a lot of the same characteristics as Alaska. So, Guy, can you spend just 3 minutes or so?
Sure. I will be brief, but if your clam curiosity gets the best of you, you can pick up a clam 101 right here. Our East Coast clam fisheries went under Magnuson-Stevens in 1977. We were actually the first federally managed fishery. Quite frankly, we had a collapse in our stock in about 1975, so it was imperative that we do something as far as management. If you fast forward to today, we are considered by many to be one of the best managed fisheries, certainly in the United States, possibly the world. That's done basically through good science. We're fortunate that when we go out and we count and measure during surveys, we're not counting swimming fish. Once a clam, 6 weeks into its larval stage, gets its shell and drops to the bottom of the ocean, it's not going anywhere. So we can keep track of the family over some 35 years, which we do on triennial surveys and stock assessment workshops. Our science is very robust, which follows along with the NOAA principles, and I spend about a third of my time as a vice president of marketing, almost as an employee of NOAA, touting the strength of NOAA fisheries, because it is very important to our customers. And Stephanie mentioned briefly MSC, and I won't go into it, but MSC had a good reputation of going to our customers and explaining to them the dire straits that seafood fisheries were in. Our customers consequently came to us, and my sustainability presentation is about an hour and 45 minutes, and we typically walk out to a round of applause, and that's great. And we are very proud of our fishery and of the job that NOAA does. And one thing that I like to tell customers that are concerned with sustainability, that no third-party certification, as good as it is, and I think there may be some places in the world where it's necessary, where robust fishery management programs are not in place, but it's certainly not in the United States, that any third-party certification can't do what NOAA can do. If our fishery becomes overfished and overfishing is occurring, we have the federal law behind our fisheries management plan, and our quotas will reduce to such a level to where that stock is able to rebound. I mean, we're a prime example of that. We crashed so far before this, we're not even on the rebuild statuses. But we are very robust, and we continue to be. And that's about all I have. You know, we'll have questions later.
Great, thank you, Guy. So we have Guy Simmons, Guy Pizzuti, a couple of guys.
Two guys.
On the panel there.
A couple
Guy
guys.
Pizzuti, you get a lot of experience, science-based experience, government experience, and now retail experience. How do you deal with this when you're at the pointy end of the spear with the customer? How do you deal with all this?
Well, let me really go into it. I think one of the things that we look at public specifically is it's kind of entry competition. On our end, we look at it, I think our consumers expect it. I mean, so it's something that when we look at it, it's kind of entry to the market. If you're not working on sustainability, you've got some disappointed consumers out there. So I think that's the primary focus from our standpoint, is the expectation on the part of our consumers. John asked me to talk a little bit today about Public's quick overview on who we are. And then to get into our sustainability program, we have what most consider to be a unique approach to how we address seafood sustainability. As John mentioned, I've got 26 years with the industry. In addition to my work at Publix, I'm also the co-chair of the Food Marketing Institute's Seafood Sustainability Committee. For Publix and for the rest of us on that committee, sustainability is much like food safety. It's a pre-competitive issue. So we do not look at sustainability as a competitive advantage, and that's one of the unique ways that we go about it. All of my 28 years has been with the commercial industry. I've not worked outside of that. So the 8 years that I was with National Marine Fisheries Service was working with the commercial sector, and obviously with Publix, my primary focus is on the commercial sector. For those not familiar with Publix, we are a 100% employee-owned company. We have 1,080 stores focused in the Southeast. We're in Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee, and in February we crossed the state line into North Carolina, and we now have 4 stores operating in North Carolina. We are the 7th largest retailer in the United States. We are the 6th largest privately owned company in the United States and the #1 privately owned company in the state of Florida. So we have a very large footprint throughout the Southeast. As far as seafood goes for Publix, we're about 3% of our total business. We do about $30 billion a year at Publix, and we're 3% of that. So we're going to do well over $540 million this year. To put that to numbers, that's about 225 million seafood meals. So if you're counting a 4-ounce serving as a meal, which I would not do, but if you use that 4-ounce serving, that's 225 million meals. Divide that in half for my serving. Talk a little bit about our sustainability program. Before I can talk about that, we've got to talk about our mission statement. And the mission statement is what we believe guides Publix as a company to be successful. And one of the tenets of our mission statement is to be responsible citizens in our communities. And for us, that's where we hang our sustainability program. It falls under that tenet of our corporate mission. Where we begin to be a little bit unique in how we go about it is we look at being responsible not only to the resource, but also to the industry. There's a lot of emphasis, there's a lot of conversation around sustainability about the resource. We've got to protect the resource. Why do we want to protect the resource? Well, so for years to come, there's seafood out there that's available for the people to eat. But if there's nobody to catch it, what good is it? So we look at a responsibility to the industry as well. Now, Alaska may be a little bit different. But as I work in the Southeast and you start to see the smaller fisheries, I was with the NOAA 18, 19, 20 years ago. You know who's running the grouper boats up at Deer Beach right now? The same guys that were running them 20 years ago. There's no young guys coming into these smaller fisheries, whether you're talking about grouper, stone crab, shrimp, all along the South Atlantic and through the Gulf. So yeah, we may be sustainable, but if there's nobody there to catch it, that's an issue for Publix. So we have a responsibility to the resource, but also to the industry. And that's really what drives our program moving forward. Our focus is on our supply chain. While it would be nice to have the entire world sustainable, at the end of the day, we've got to focus on what we're doing. And if what we do with our 4 or 5 suppliers or our 20 or 30 vessels gets us where we need to be, then we can worry about the other people in the other industries. But we've got to take care of ourselves first. We are also unique. We did not jump on the bandwagon 6 years ago with Red, Yellow, Green, with Red List, with Eco Labels, with MSC, for several of the reasons discussed here. We look at sustainability from our standpoint as a continuous improvement model. These fisheries did not get broke overnight. Why everybody expects them to be fixed overnight is beyond me. It just doesn't work that way. So we work on a continuous improvement model. Unlike some who have said we're going to be this by this year, we did not put a timeline because you can't put a timeline on sustainability. It's something you have to work through. We monitor our improvement. If we're involved in a fishery improvement project, that has set timelines, but our overall sustainability goals are about improvement. So we have that FIP of fishery improvement process mentality because that allows us in our eyes to drive what we believe is true and lasting change. If you work with the industry, you have the ability to make a change. If you dictate to the industry, as some of these other programs do, I think you lose that ability. This is a seller's market. If I don't want to buy the product, there's somebody else out there that doesn't care about sustainability. So I can mandate it to you, but you're just going to turn and sell your product somewhere else. By working in collaboration with the industry, we really believe that we can drive true and lasting change. So when you look at our program, we really do it in 3 stages. Our first stage is evaluation. The second stage is prioritization. Prioritization is very important. There may be a fish out there that we sell 5 pounds of that's completely unsustainable. We're not going to get any effort from working through that process. So we rank it based on sustainability ranking, but also sales, so that we're working on those areas where we can make the biggest impact to overall sustainability. Finally, we go through our fishery improvement projects, and then it loops back around. So it's a constant cycle of evaluation, prioritization, improvement, and then we drive our framework moving forward from there. Just finalizing in summary here, why is this important to us? Again, it's our mission statement. The mission statement is what we believe makes us as a company successful, so we have to do everything in our power to honor that mission statement. We look at it as sustainability in terms of, like most do, people, planet, profit. We look at people. I've got associates that are involved in seafood at Publix. I've got people in warehouses. We've got jobs that are attached to seafood. We've got the industry portion with Keith and the rest of the folks out there in the industry. We've got to take care of that industry. When we look at planet, resource, given, it's what it is. And then there's the profit piece. I mean, it's 550 million in sales. That's a big hit to a company of our size. So that kind of summarizes where we're at, and be happy to take questions later.
Thank you, Guy. Interesting language, responsibility to the industry. And so, Keith, I think that was a kind of a good segue into you. That you're part of that industry that Guy in Publix feels a responsibility to, so that you can keep fishing well into the future. And I know that's part of the ethic that you bring to the crab fishery. So could you explain how that fishery works and some of the challenges, the benefits that you see, and how fisheries are run, and then some things that you've stayed away from?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Keith Colburn. I'm a crab fisherman. I own a boat, the Wizard. I've been in Alaska for, pardon my voice, 29 years. I fished virtually every gear type in western Alaska, the Aleutians, all the way from Nome to Kodiak. I was invited here by PSBA, which is the processors, and I kind of raised my eyebrow a little bit because I'm a harvester, and true to form, I'm told I get like 15 minutes to talk, and now I only get 3. So it's almost like our price negotiations.
You're dealing with Pizzutis right next to you. Come on.
But anyways, I would like to thank PSBA, ASME, and NF5 for having me here today, as well as the senators from the Northwest and Alaska. I was here last October, and this town was shut down. The government shut down, they impacted us last October, and nobody fought harder for us than the delegations from the Northwest. So I just want to thank Lisa, Mr. Bagage, and Ms. Cantwell for doing what they did to get us back on the water, and they were instrumental in doing that. So anyways, those senators also are continuously fighting for us. They're fighting for us with appropriations process. They're fighting for us for funding for our fisheries. They're fighting for us for common sense regulations with the Coast Guard and the EPA. They're fighting for us on the illegal crab issue. I mean, we couldn't ask for a stronger group of people to support us in this city and in this country, but not only for Alaska fisheries, for all fisheries. They continue to fight for us. With me, you probably know me because you see me fighting with my brother on TV. But I've also fought for crab fishermen and fishermen with the advisory committee to the North Pacific Council. I've worked with the Alaska Safety Association, trying to promote safety and insuring vessels. But I've also worked with the Alaska Marketing Association for a number of years, which basically fought with the processors over pricing. One story comes to mind when I think about, some of our negotiations. And about 10 years ago, a delegation of crabbers, myself and about 3 other guys, sat down with the processors, and they said, hey, there's this new label out. The state of Alaska just basically purchased this label, and in doing so, it's going to make their salmon fishery a sustainable fishery. It's already a sustainable fishery, but it's going to at least say that it's sustainable. And it's a nice label, right? So, in doing so, the state of Alaska legitimized this label. they helped this label in many ways because it was the first really true big fishery that this label had. So they came to the crabbers and said, hey, let's do it for crab as well. So they give me this spiel, we sit down, I kind of think about it for a while, and I ask the question. I'm like, so you're asking us to spend a ton of money to buy a label to put on our crab. I mean, the state of Alaska has been, worldwide a model for sustainability for 50 years or more. What you're asking us to have scientists critique our scientists, that doesn't make sense. I mean, can they critique our scientists if they're the best ones out there? If we have the best record for sustainability? So, needless to say, the talks broke down. We left, no black eyes, everything was good. We never had the label on a box of Bering Sea crab. But today, Bering Sea crab and our fisheries are deemed sustainable. And they have been, and we've suffered through closures. We've worked through closures. We've had, a fluctuation in our fishery that comes year in and year out. But overall, we've worked as hard as we can with the state, with National Marine Fisheries, with virtually every agency out there to try and maintain these fisheries, not only for us, but for our kids and our grandkids, And you guys are actually going to be really happy that I didn't read this because I think the word sustainability is in there like 97 times. But anyways, I'm proud of my fishery. My fishery is a sustainable fishery. We've been able to work under our new program, which is an ITQ catch share program. It's helped improve safety. It's helped improve conservation. We've made, all kinds of great benefits towards, releasing the small and juvenile crab. And we've done this in partnership with a number of agencies. And our fishery is as healthy as we could wish it to be right now. And you know what? I can't thank anybody more than the rest of you in this room for being the people that are on the leading edge of fighting for our fisheries and fighting for our oceans. We are the first line of defense. And if we're not there to do it, who's going to be there to do it? Okay, one more bad processor joke. No. Actually, I'll just tell one quick story about Lisa real fast. So last fall when I was back here, Lisa's got her sons going out on a crab boat. I didn't know this, right? She's like, hey, Keith. So, my son's going out on this crab boat. She tells me the name of the boat, and I go, oh my God, that's the smallest crab boat in the Bering Sea. So I watched the blood drain out of her face. I'm thinking, oh my God, that's probably the dumbest thing I ever said, right? I got the senators going to be upset with me for the rest of the day because I got her freaked out about her son. But needless to say, Lisa was fine. Her son did great last fall fishing, and we've got another crabber in the Bering Sea.
Thank you, Keith. I have a couple of questions, but we really ask for questions from the audience also. Maybe, Keith, to start with you, your fishery is well managed, fishery safer. You said that, and I think Senator Murkowski appreciates that now, given her son's situation. And fishery profitable? You wish it were more profitable, I understand that.
Well, yeah.
But you're not having trouble selling your product without an additional label?
No, not at all. Our fishery is profitable. We are doing well. It's seasonal. It's, annually we'll see it fluctuate, but for the most part, our fisheries up there, snow crab, tanner crab is open this year again, red king crab, the golden crab fishermen, are all doing well. I'm happy to say that we're in a very lucrative industry and we're doing quite well. Not as well as we'd like to be doing, but, no, I can't say that. We're actually doing really well.
Good. And I think that's an important message, that crab fishery, in other fisheries that Dean's responsible for, or Stephanie and her group are responsible for, they're well-run fisheries, and they're not disadvantaged in places where they need to get in that, because some people are talking about sustainability in a different way. Guy, what do you see as the future challenges or problems from a consumer perspective?
From a consumer, so I'm going to count myself as a consumer from a purchasing, not necessarily the end consumer. and it's different for each fishery. One of the bigger challenges, and I'll touch on one that's close to home in the Gulf with the red snapper fishery as an example. When we look at sustainability, whether it's the eco label or otherwise, everything is focused on the commercial sector. And what are they doing for sustainability? There's no emphasis on the impact the recreational sector has on various fisheries. And again, it's different. There's some that are 100% commercial, but where you have these even splits, there's a concern there. So that's, speaking from one of the issues that's jumping forward close to home with Publix. Now, looking at it from the consumer that's purchasing the product, if these allocations shift, or there's a potential for these to shift further away, not everybody in the Southeast has the opportunity to run offshore and catch their own fish. So anytime any of those allocations tend to shift, that's pulling product away from the consumer. So I think if I'm looking at challenges, that's going to be the one that sits front and center, is how do we actually monitor and evaluate sustainability on the recreational sector? Because all the third-party people are looking solely at commercial, where NOAA at least is trying to look and capture the best data they can on the recreational sector. But when you look at all the rating systems, nothing is focused on that recreational side.
Yeah, that's an issue that came up at a panel that Eileen and I were on this morning. What is the impact of recreational fishery on the health of the stocks? And for Stephanie and Eileen, and those of you who have some responsibility in international fora, and we export between 1/3 and 1/2 of seafood in the U.S., primarily to Europe and some to Asia. That has become increasingly can be a challenge in communicating these issues of sustainability. And I mean, I know you're kind of just getting started 6 months in, and Stephanie, but what are both of your views on how you communicate to your peers overseas about how this fishery management system is different and should be rewarded in the marketplace to which we export product? Have you had a chance to either think through that or begun those conversations with your peers overseas?
I haven't been having direct conversations, but obviously people in MINS have. And, I think that we take this concept that we've been talking about here today and have said, when we're talking to you, for example, we're happy to write a letter explaining that fish from a U.S. managed federal saltwater fishery is managed pursuant to the Magnuson Act is in our view sustainable. So we are trying to translate that this concept. Our fisheries, our federal fisheries are sustainably managed, but that should be good enough to meet the sustainability standards. I think that we're willing to say that there are a lot of tools in the toolkit. There's some voluntary certification, traceability schemes. They have value either here or abroad, but we're starting from the foundation that we have a whole system that's designed to implement the constantly changing instrument of sustainability.
And I think it's something, again, reflecting on one of the panelists this morning talked about, it is the system that matters. It doesn't matter what occurs on June 12th, the status of the stock on June 12th, 2014. It is how management reacts to that. And too often people are trying to take a snapshot and saying, well, this fishery is in X state, rather than looking at the cyclical nature. And I think, Keith, you reflected that in your comments. Sometimes the fishery's up, sometimes it's down. And that's the nature of fisheries management. Stephanie, anything from the export side or communication side?
Sure. The fisheries and fisheries management governances are both complicated, and so that's the argument about third-party certification, is we need to find out a way to make things simpler for the consumer. And people who advocate for it, that's what they are promoting. It does need to be simpler, and I think that we can put together a message to begin educating consumers who have a real interest in promoting sustainability with other tools. And in the interim, for consumers who don't believe that government can be trusted to sustainably manage fisheries or provide appropriate oversight, that's why we've constructed the RFM program. It's simply an audit
so that there is a third party saying that we're doing what we say we're doing. And so I feel like that's really a bridge to consumers understanding the elements of a sustainable program, is having that audit layer in there for now, and we can hope that we can continue to educate people that we have a strong governance structure here in the United States.
You have an extraordinarily patient. Hopefully you've enjoyed the delicious sockeye and the chowder, et cetera. Do you have questions for the panel? Anyone? How about does the panel have any questions for each other? I'll go with John and then Nadine.
John, I have a question with Stephanie and the others, which is the concept that under the Magnuson Act of the Fishery Council, there's a very robust process where there's a lot of disagreements about the science, and then there's a consensus on the best science. And do you see a danger that a third-party certification can undermine public trust in that when they directly contradict the NOAA science and say, as we saw in one example, the Barents Sea Canyons, that these third-party organizations had a different view that was rejected by NOAA science, and then they claimed to their people who use their methods, those people should also reject NOAA science. Do you feel that's a danger in this situation?
Stephanie, if you just want to talk about that more broadly than the specific canyon situation, because it's ongoing, but more broadly, I think that question is.
Sure. Well, we have a long experience with a certification entity and now have put up choice in that marketplace. And we have seen it depends who's doing the review for those certifications. So there's not only controversy and difficult or differences in opinion as to how to interpret information within the council process and looking for diverse input to that so that we ensure that we're making science-based decisions. But they're selecting a subset, a small number of scientists to inform third-party certification who have less familiarity at the region level. And we have seen through the reviews that different perspectives come out. So what wasn't an issue in one 5-year review might become an issue in another 5-year review. And I think that that shows that there needs to be a much more robust process and something like the panel process, the stock assessment process, all these things that are open to the public, to academic, to NGO. Participation probably is the more long-lasting and sensical choice.
Yeah, maybe just before your question, and for the people on the Hill, I think the nature of that's very important because some of the certification programs will require these conditions that Stephanie mentioned, which actually dictate to the managers, to the fishery managers, where they spend money to solve a problem. So, I'll use the example in Canada. There was a fishery on the west coast that sought certification, and they had conditions placed on them saying you had to fix X, Y, and Z. Well, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Canada said, well, we have problems on the East Coast where we want to spend taxpayers' money. However, to get this certification, we have to divert the money from the East Coast fishery, which is in much more dire straits, and put it over the West Coast. And so that has substituted the judgment of professional fisheries managers to a third party, and in a way taken away the responsibility that you're given as the Hill to the fishery manager through things like the Magnuson Act. So there is an implication that I think the Hill needs to think through on questions like that.
John, if I can jump in, just make a comment on John's question there. I would argue that issue already exists today between the certification groups. If you look at a fishery like Alaskan pollock, MSC certified, NOAA says it's sustainable, but it's on Greenpeace's red list. So those issues currently exist. It's one of the reasons that Publix as a company made a decision to stay out of the eco-label business because of the confusion to the customer. There is nobody that really agrees across all the fisheries. So that's one of the primary reasons where we did not pursue eco-labeling is because of that concern you just raised.
Nadine?
Was my question, thank you, John. My question builds on some of your comments that you just made there. So over the past decades, several organizations, for example, the Rural Sustainable Sea Initiative and the Conservation Alliance for Sustainable Solutions, CAS, have worked to try to address the complexity and create, or at least bring some clarity to the eco-labeling space. How has that worked for the industry, and how will that align with the work that Senator Murkowski is possibly going to do on the federal level? Is that a clear question? Like the work that the industry has already been doing to consolidate that space, or at least clarify it. How is it different from what will be done at the federal and regulatory level?
Only because there were some acronyms in there that I don't think everyone understood, so I'm going to rephrase it. If I don't have to get the question right, Nadine, just tell me. And there are multiple eco-labels out there. There's the MSC, there's BAP, there's ASC, there's Naturland, there's Global Gap, there's Friends of the Sea, and there's Friends of the Sea, etc. So each of someone like Keith is being asked, or a processor is being asked for different retail customers to get their specific certification done. So all of a sudden, the processor or the boat captain has to do one certification system for Kroger, another one for Tesco, another one for Carrefour, another one for Walmart, etc. So there's been an interest in seeing whether or not there can be some kind of harmonization of those. I'll give our perspective. GSSI, which is the Global Seafood Sustainability Initiative, was begun to look at whether or not there could be a criteria to say, set a benchmark or set a bar that says these are credible programs and these are not, and because they just don't have the rigor. And first of all, we believe that this is a government responsibility, but for market reasons, certification is required. We are disappointed, though, that GSSI said, well, there's a bar, but then we're going to rank all these certifications again. Ranking 15 certifications does no value to the processing industry, because you are going to end up with Kroger asking for one, Carrefour asking for another, Tesco asking for another. Just tell us what's a credible program, what's not, and we'll solve that problem. So from an industry perspective, that's our view. But again, I think what we heard today was, whether it be Alaska or NOAA, the basis of all this is the government management, science management and enforcement, right? All right. Any other questions? Because we've kind of run up our 2 o'clock time. We very much appreciate everyone hanging in there. What I think you heard today was strong support for how fisheries are managed in the U.S., in a recognition that all fisheries are not managed as well. And also, there's not a monolithic approach that retailers or processors take. And that Guy, as an example, takes a very different approach, but that has worked for them, worked well. But a lot of it is based on support for the government approach to fisheries management. And then I thought it was very interesting, what Keith started with is, directly to you, is a thanks to you for the support that you provide to fisheries, the fisheries management, to the agencies, whether it be at the federal or state level, in support of being able to provide those 225 million seafood meals that Guy talked about just in his store alone. Those are great stories, and I think Keith aptly started his talk with a thanks to you for providing that kind of support through Magnuson and other laws, and then the appropriate appropriations. So with that, thank you. I appreciate your time.
No problem. Not till 6.